Thanks for joining us for this third week of our series on Elijah the prophet, who was struggling to be a messenger of God in an upside down world. And I'll tell you what, if anybody knows what it's like to be living in an upside down world, it's us. We're not really supposed to go to the store without masks, and many people have to wear masks to work, and many people are out of work, and a lot of us who want nothing to do with English and math and science are suddenly teaching our children, who have all of a sudden forgotten as they sit on the couch in front of their computer how to read and how to do math and how to do science, and they need us to do it for them, and it's driving us all crazy. So yes, we can understand what it means to be living in an upside down world, just like the prophet Elijah. So many of us can identify with the prophet Elijah, and maybe we've never stood up and spoke boldly to a king before. Maybe we've never hidden in a ravine and been fed by ravens. Maybe we've never brought the dead back to life, but all of us know what it means to be in a position of waiting, in a position of discomfort, in a position of frustration. And if anything, that's the prophet Elijah. Elijah knows what it means to wait on the blessings and the presence and the provisions of God. And this is what we're experiencing currently as we live through this global pandemic. And this is where we find Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 18. He's been waiting on the blessings and provisions of God. But as we've seen Elijah go forward through these passages, through chapter 17 and 18, we've seen Elijah become progressively more bold, progressively more outgoing as he serves as God's messenger. And that's what we find him doing today in this passage in 1 Kings chapter 18. We're going to see Elijah at his most bold, most daring, most courageous. And truly, this is one of my favorite passages in all the Bible, and I think it's going to be yours too after today's message. So let's jump in and read what in my mind is one of the coolest stories in all of the Bible. It says in verse 16, Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you troubler of Israel?" Elijah says, "I have not made trouble for you or for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel." Now, I told you that Elijah keeps getting bolder and bolder and bolder and more courageous and more outgoing, and you totally see it here, because if you remember, if you look back at 1 Kings chapter 17, the first time Elijah meets Ahab, he speaks these bold words to him, but then he runs away. He sort of like goes into hiding, and God says, "I'm going to feed you in this ravine, the birds are going to feed you," and just kind of hang out there for a while. And now Elijah is going to Ahab, and he's speaking very boldly to him, and he's trying to set up this encounter. He says, "Hey, get all the people you can, all the people of Israel, and I want you to meet me up on top of Mount Carmel." And when I was writing this and reading this, I just sort of had to laugh, because the thought that came into my mind was Elijah the prophet trying to set up this epic rap battle, right? Like he's like, "Hey, get all your people together, and we're gonna spit some fire, man. We're gonna see who the reigning champion of Mount Carmel is in the battle of all the raps." And this really brings me back to my childhood growing up in Madison, Ohio. We had so many epic rap battles down at Township Park. I mean, it was just incredible. But this is what Elijah's doing. He's setting up this really epic, huge encounter between Ahab and all his people and Elijah and his faith in the one true God. And so Elijah says, "Go ahead and you gather 450 prophets, and you bring your people on top of this mountain, and we're going to meet up there, and we're going to see who the true God is." Now, Ahab is quick to agree, because according to his religion, and remember, he worships the god Baal, in his mind and his religion, he believes that Baal lives on Mount Carmel. So in Ahab's mind, he's thinking, okay, well, Elijah wants to meet me on top of this mountain where my God lives with all the people and all my prophets. So this is a really good situation if you're King Ahab, right? He thinks he's got Elijah right where he wants him. And so this really sets the stage for what's about to happen next. There's thousands of people on top of Mount Carmel, the people from all over Israel, people who have sort of turned their back on God and are now worshiping Baal under the direction of King Ahab. And you've got 450 prophets, and it's this real showdown. And Elijah, he's just by himself, right? And he gets up there and he says to the people of Israel, he's like, look, you got to make your mind up. You keep switching back and forth between the God of your ancestors, the God of Israel, the God that you grew up knowing and were faithful to, and Baal. You got to choose which one's which. And this is the situation, this is the setting in which this incredible story takes place. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because there's a lot of story that we have to get to. But really, as we get to this part in the passage, we start to ask ourselves, what is the application here? And as we're reading this, the question that we should be asking ourselves is about our own worship. Where do we place our worship? Where are we building our altars? Who has our allegiance? Is it God, or is it the idols that we put in our life that draw our attention away? And so be thinking about that question as we read further in the text, because we're going to come back to that question when we wrap all of this up. But Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you can call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God. Then all the people say, what you say is good. So Elijah sets up this contest, and he says, you're going to set up an altar and you're going to put a bull on it, and I'm going to do the same thing, and you're going to pray to your God and I'm going to pray to mine. And the God that brings fire from heaven and burns the offering, and when he says fire from heaven, he's talking about lightning. The God who brings fire from heaven is the true God. And all the people are like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. That sounds like a really great idea. And I think they agree really quickly because they really think that Elijah is in a bad situation, right? Like, he's on enemy territory and he's outnumbered, and really it looks like Ahab has Elijah right where he wants him, doesn't it? But Elijah is very bold and he's very courageous, and he's really convinced that God is going to intercede for him. Have you ever read that passage that says the righteous are as bold as a lion? Well, Elijah is righteous, and he is certainly as bold as a lion. In fact, he's so bold that he takes this incredible stance in the presence of his enemies. And as you're reading this, and as you're hearing this, and maybe for the first time you're thinking, Elijah is totally nuts. Like, who would do that? But this is a measure and an indication of Elijah's boldness. He knows that God will intercede for him. There's no doubt in his mind. And that's why he makes such an incredible, bold stance. Now, I'm going to read the rest of the story because it gets even better. But before I do, I want you to think about some act of boldness that you've seen in your own life. What is something that you've seen someone else do that's incredibly bold as a response to their faith? Or what's something that you feel like you have done, which is a step out into boldness because of your belief in God? Can you put your answer in the comments below? Let's talk about that for a moment or two. Boldness inspires, boldness motivates, and that's what Elijah is about to show us here in this passage. So Elijah looks like he's the underdog. It looks like Ahab has him right where he wants him. And Elijah does nothing to change that perception. Here's what Elijah says. He says, look, you can pick the best bull, right? Because if you're giving an animal sacrifice, it's important that that animal was in the best shape. You want it to be fat and without disease or blemish. And so Elijah says, you pick the bull that you want. You take the animal that you think is the best. And you've got your 450 prophets, and you guys can run around and dance around and do whatever you want, sing, pray, do whatever you want. In fact, you can take all the time you need to do it. So Elijah has given them every advantage. They have the best bull. They've got the most prophets. They've got home field advantage. They've got all the time that they need. And if I'm an onlooker, if I'm one of those thousands of Israelites who are looking at Elijah and Ahab and the prophets and sort of taking all this in, I'm thinking there's no chance that this goes wrong for Ahab. There's no chance that Elijah wins this duel because he's so outnumbered. He's at such a great disadvantage. But the prophets of Baal dance around and they sing and they pray for 3 hours and nothing happens. And so Elijah, and look, this is why we call Elijah a wild man of a prophet. This man was not a gentleman, okay? And so this is when Elijah starts to do that kind of thing Elijah likes to do, and he starts taunting them. It says that Elijah at noon began to taunt them, saying, "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he's in deep thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and he must be awakened." Do you have that one friend who loves to watch sports but give commentary in that loud sort of way, like yelling at the TV and yelling at the refs? And if you go to a game, he's hollering or she's hollering and screaming, and the people around are like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe he just said that." Well, I know someone like that. My friend Todd Ness is like that. And Elijah reminds me of my friend Todd Ness at a football game or watching the game on TV, because Elijah won't let up. He's taunting and he's calling them names. He says, "Where is your God? Is he taking a nap? Is he thinking about important concepts? Is he doing math problems? Is he watching Netflix? What's your God doing? Is he on vacation? Maybe he can't hear you. Maybe he's taking a nap. Maybe he's just busy." And when we understand the language in the original Hebrew behind what Elijah is saying here, that word becomes extremely offensive and also pretty dang funny, because what Elijah is saying is, maybe your God is relieving himself. The actual translation is excreting. Maybe your God is excreting, and we know what that means. Elijah's like, is your God on the potty? Is your God doing the number 2? Is your God doing the Facebook scroll, the Instagram scroll on the toilet? Now, if you're offended, you're like, "Pastor, you can't say the word on a sermon on Sunday morning." First of all, calm down. I promise you that's not the most offensive thing you've heard on the internet this morning, or the most offensive thing that you will hear on Facebook today. And second of all, if it sounds offensive and crass and rude, that's exactly the fact that Elijah was going for. He was trying to sound intense. He was trying to mock them. He was trying to make the point that your God isn't real. That's why he's not answering. What you're doing is totally hopeless, totally ridiculous, and totally pointless. So their response was to shout louder, and they slashed themselves with swords and spears as was their custom until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. I'm going to read that part again. There was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. And so the prophets, in response to Elijah's taunting, they started to cut themselves and get weird and dance around more and shout out more, but no one was listening. No one answered. And at this point, the people have totally lost interest. They know that these prophets have no credibility, and Ahab and these prophets look like total fools. And that was exactly Elijah's plan. He accomplished his mission. So really, maybe Todd's onto something, right? Maybe we should be yelling at the TV and screaming at the refs and yelling at all those football fans, especially the Steelers fans. So this is the moment that Elijah has been waiting for. He's got all these people right where he wants them, and he does something a little bit strange. First, he calls their attention. He says, "Hey, everybody, look over this way. Check me out." And he does this really weird thing where he picks up these 12 stones and he starts to build an altar. And around this altar, he digs a fairly sizable trench. And then he tells these people to bring him 4 large jugs of water. And he says, pour the water all over the altar. Pour the water over the rocks and the soil and the bowl. And he tells them to do that 3 times. And so Elijah's building this tension because they've got to go down the mountain and bring the water up. And this maybe takes an hour. Who knows how long it takes. But he's building this tension. He's building this anticipation. And the question is, why is he doing all this strange stuff? Well, really, just like he did before, he's almost trying to stack the deck against himself. He's trying to give himself every possible disadvantage so that when people see what God's about to do, and I think you know what God's about to do, Elijah knows what God's about to do, when the people see what God's about to do, there's no doubt who's in control. There's no doubt who has the true power. And so after Elijah sets the stage, after he creates all this tension, he goes to God in prayer. We get to read this prayer here. God, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me. So these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Notice two things about this prayer. First, Elijah speaks to God as one person would speak to another. He speaks to God with humility and respect and reverence, like a son would speak to a father. And the second thing is Elijah's request. Look at his request. He says, let it be known. Let it be known. And this might be my favorite part of the entire passage, because what he's saying is, God, let it be known that you are the one making a difference. It's not about my authority. It's not about the respect I want people to have for me. It's not about my power or my desire. And look, who could blame Elijah for wanting people to respect him and love him and to think he's powerful? He's been at such a disadvantage. People have talked about him. He's someone whose name is mud. He's someone who has a terrible reputation. So it'd be easy for him to say, God, make this about me. But that's not what he says. He says, God, let it be known that it's you with the power. It's you making the difference. It's you who needs to turn their hearts back so they can once again experience your grace and your holiness and your peace and your love. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." God responded to Elijah's prayer in a way that was unmistakably Him. He sent fire, He sent lightning from the sky, and it burned up the offering. It burned up the wood. It incinerated the stone. It burned up the soil. It burned up all the water. And the response of the people was a response of amazement and really a sense of fear, a sense of awe, the same sort of reaction that we see in the New Testament to the miracles of Jesus. And they fall on the ground and worship, acknowledging this is the true God. He did what no one else could do. He did what the prophets of Baal and Ahab couldn't do. And this is the response that Elijah was praying for, because the people turned their hearts back to God. And so if you've heard this for the first time, or maybe you've read it for the first time in a long time and you've never really understood what the application is, I think the application for us, it seems to me, it's pretty clear in that we often turn our hearts away from God, and really we do it pretty easily. And it's not Baal. We don't worship stones, and we don't worship calves, and we don't worship foreign weird gods made out of gold, but we worship things like a career. We worship things like relationships. We worship things like college education. We worship things like wealth. And we've all done this, where we get in this mode, we are on fire for God. We start that new church, or we start that new Bible study, or we hear that new song, or we hear that scripture, or we start leading a small group, or we start working at the soup kitchen, and we are just like on fire for Jesus until something else comes along that distracts us and takes our attention. And 9 times out of 10, make it 10 times out of 10, the reason that we turn our minds and turn our hearts is because that thing suits our preference and is probably a whole lot easier than following after Jesus. And so often we get caught up in seeking after a God who fills and meets only a very specific need in our life, the need that we feel like is like the most important. And that could be a God of wealth, a God of career, a God of sex, a God of addiction, a God of health, a God of education, a God of social status, that we forget that the one true God is bigger than all of the things that we could ever want, all of the things that we could ever hope and wish for. And He's the same in wealth as He is in poverty. He's the same in sickness as He is in health. He's the same in loneliness as He is in community. He is the same in the mountaintop as he is in the valley. So we spend so much of our time seeking after a God who is weak and incompetent and can't even really provide us with any lasting satisfaction. And we turn our back on the God of the universe, who is the Alpha and the Omega, the healer, the restorer, the God of creation, the God who mends us and brings us hope and life and makes us into a new creation, a God who creates beauty from ashes. And so this is how this passage can apply to us. It asks us to search our hearts and look and discover where our hearts are aimed right now, where the direction of our thinking and love is focused. It forces us to ask ourselves, is it time to make a turn in my heart from this idol or thing that I've been worshiping back to the God who created me and loves me and restores me and gives me hope? Now, I want to give you a moment as you're in your living room, in your kitchen, or on your cell phone to make that application become real. And so get a piece of paper out, maybe text yourself and ask yourself, don't write this in the comments below because this is personal, this is between you and God, but ask yourself right now if there's an area in your life where you need to turn your heart back to God. Is there an area where God needs to see more of your focus? Is there an area where you can make him bigger and more real than ever before? Write it down, maybe send a text message to yourself, and let me know in the comments that you've done that by just giving us a thumbs up so that our prayer team can know that you're doing this and they can pray for you specifically. Go ahead and take a moment. Now, before we go, and I know this message has been just a little bit longer than what we've grown accustomed to here in virtual church, I want us to talk about the community application of this passage, because there is an individual application that has to do with me and you as individuals, but there's also an application that deals with us together as a community of faith. Do you remember back in verse 31 where Elijah built that altar with 12 stones? Now, if you read the text, you'll notice that he used 12 stones from an altar built for God, an altar that was torn down by these prophets of Baal, by these Baal worshipers, by Ahab and his people, an altar that was reserved for God and his holiness. Well, Elijah found the remnants of this altar in 12 pieces, and he put it back together crudely, and I'm sure it didn't look nice. It looked like it was something that had been beautiful, but was now broken. And he used this old expression of faith, this tool that was once wonderful and devoted to God, and he put it back together into something new, so God could use it for a new expression of his glory. I want you to hear that again. God did something new. He did a new thing with something that was broken. As you sit at home, missing your friends, missing those high fives, missing those hugs, missing the people that you used to sit next to in church, missing the old expression of something that you love, I don't want you to be anxious, and I don't want you to be worried, and I don't want you to be dismayed or fearful, because God is going to take that old altar that we grew accustomed to, that altar that we knew as the church, the altar that seems to have been broken to pieces in this current pandemic, in this current situation, and he's going to piece it back together in a new and different way so that he can do a new thing. And right now, I think we're living right in the middle of that. God is using us to put these 12 stones back together imperfectly in a way that's different than before, so he can let it be known, just as Elijah prayed, so that he can let it be known that he is God and that we are his people, and that he is the one who heals. He is the one who restores. He is the one who uses resurrection power to bring dead things back to life, to restore and to heal and to make brand new. But I don't think it's going to be like it was before. I think God is going to use those 12 stones. He's going to use us and create a new sense, a renewed sense of devotion, a renewed sense of love, a renewed sense of community, a renewed sense of passion and boldness to make a difference in the world around us, using us in such an extravagant way that the people around us will look at us and say, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God," just like they did when Elijah called down fire and God brought fire to prove himself and to prove his glory and to prove his magnificent presence and provision. And I'm not sure that church, as we know it, is gonna look the way it used to. It may never look the way it used to. I think that God is gonna take those 12 stones and transform everything we know about Christian community, everything we know about the body of Christ. But when he does, it'll be more miraculous, more life-giving, more hope-filling than anything that we've ever experienced before. But he will use us. So be encouraged, stay bold, stay committed, be hopeful, and most importantly, be ready, because he's going to use us. He's going to use you. So watch and see what he does with these 12 stones.